ever notice how certain political talking points sound strong, but then reality always shows up and then punches them right in the face? That's what just happened.
You can't get a bank account, you can't get a job, you can't lie, you can't get a loan, you can't buy tobacco, you can't buy alcohol, you can't even sign up for government benefits unless you have an ID. But somehow, when it comes to voting, it is going to limit the ability for people to vote, or they may not have an ID. And you're going, really? But these are the same people that wanted to move alcohol and tobacco from 18 to 21, and you had to show a proof of ID. I don't get it. You can't argue with crazy, but that's exactly what they sound like.
Yes, they do. All right, let's go ahead and set the baseline. This is the core argument you hear everywhere. ID is required for nearly every functional part of modern life. Banking, travel, employment, government services at the least. You know what I'm saying? But when it comes to elections, suddenly it becomes oppression. Now, whether you agree or disagree, that contradiction is exactly why this debate refuses to die. And it's why people keep pushing back. But I want you to watch what happens when this moves from speeches and to real world interaction.
Good. How are you? Are you the shop owner?
Yes.
I have some terrible news. It looks like your certificate for the shop, it's actually expired.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it expired, and we're gonna need $500 today to make sure that you can still have the shop going.
Who are you?
I'm Javante. I'm with the Illinois State Licensing Board.
Oh, can I have your ID?
Excuse me, bigot? Did you just ask a black man for his ID?
You're not black.
I was assigned white skin pigmentation at birth by my parents' bigoted doctor, but I identify as African American. You can't ask me for my ID. That's racist.
No, I'm not racist.
Those are your signs out there, aren't they? It says ID is racist.
That is different.
How is it different?
It's different because.
Because how? Did you ask me for my ID so you know who I am?
Who are you? You need a license.
So you're asking me so you know who I am, right?
Yes.
Because an ID makes you feel more comfortable knowing I am who I say I am?
Yeah, because I have to know who are you.
Isn't that what they're doing at the voting booth?
Yes.
Exactly. So how are IDs racist at the voting booth? You don't have an answer, do you? You just put up those signs just to put them up. You did?
Yes.
Good luck with that, buddy.
This is where the conversation turns uncomfortable because satire works by mirroring logic, not arguing it. And the moment consistency gets tested outside of theory, you see how quickly, positions get complicated. Now, step outside the stage interaction for 1 second. Let's move into something unscripted. A real moment, real reactions.
What's going on? What's your name? Mike. Mike? Yep.
What do I do with their stuff?
They have stuff in the trunk?
Yeah, suitcases.
Well, this clip right here is why immigration enforcement stays emotionally charged. No panel debate, no think tank talking points, just raw reactions in real time. My guys got scooped up in an Uber. I said, hey, And regardless of where anybody lands politically, moments like this are exactly what shape public perception. I'm just saying. Because enforcement policies don't exist on paper. They exist in reality. But I will say this, just to make it clear. I voted for this. Which leads us directly into the broader argument surrounding enforcement itself.
It makes sense why they are trying so hard to demonize ICE. Did you know? Probably didn't know this, but it makes sense. ICE is the #1 agency that goes after child traffickers. They go after terrorists in this country that are here domestically. ICE is here to go after international threats here in this country. Let's get to the part that everyone really wants to talk about. They go after people that abuse their visas and overstay. You know what'll happen? Never mind. I'm not gonna get into that because I gotta be careful because it's TikTok. It's actually not about your race as much as social media and news outlets wants to push it out. The message that I have gotten from Democrats is that protecting our country is a bad thing.
Now we shift framing completely. Instead of enforcement being presented as targeting, you hear the argument centered around protection and trafficking prevention. Two completely different narratives fighting for dominance in the same place. This is why the immigration debate never settles, because each side starts talking, from a totally different premise. But now let's zoom out back to the elections. Well, zoom back out. Did I say that right? Zoom back out. Anyhow, because that's where the legislative battle really intensifies.
I want to talk about something today that should not be controversial in a healthy democracy, and that is who gets to vote in American elections. Republicans in Congress are pushing legislation called the Save America Act. Remember that name, SAVE, because that's exactly what it does. It safeguards American voting eligibility by requiring voter ID and proof of citizenship to register in federal elections. That's it. There's no tricks here, no suppression, just verification. And for supporting this common sense idea, Democrats are completely melting down. Let's listen to Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader in the U.S. House, absolutely malfunction over the weekend on CNN. Here's cut 6.
83% of Americans, including 71% of your fellow Democrats, support requiring an ID to vote. Why are they wrong?
I haven't said that they're wrong. What Republicans are trying to do is to engage in clear and blatant voter suppression. They know that if there's a free and fair election in November, they're going to lose.
More talking points, false talking points from the Democrats. You've also heard Chuck Schumer repeatedly call voter ID Jim Crow 2.0, even though 3/4 of black voters think you should show an ID to vote. It's right there in the polling. None of them will answer the simplest question imaginable. Should only U.S. citizens vote in U.S. elections? Because once you say yes, their argument collapses. Here's the reality that Democrats don't want to admit. Voter ID is overwhelmingly popular with the American people. Republicans, independents, Democrats, black voters, Hispanic voters, white voters, men, women. Everybody is for it. 83% of Americans want voter ID.
Yep. And this is where polling data gets pulled into the arena. When broad majorities across demographics say they support voter ID, the debate stopped being a partisan, it stopped being partisan messaging and turns into a narrative control fight. Because public opinion complicates simplified labels. Now, here's what things are about to escalate, right? Because the discussion isn't theoretical anymore. It's tied to voter rolls themselves.
3,000 registered voters in Alabama just got booted from the state voter rolls. That's after the Secretary of State, Wes Allen, ordered the removal of all non-citizens who were registered. But how did non-citizens get registered in the first place? WAFF 48's Nick Ballinger spoke to the Secretary of State to get to the bottom of this story. Nick?
Yeah, Margot, when I asked Secretary Allen how these people got registered to vote in the first place, he couldn't give me a clear answer just yet, saying it was still being investigated. But when he gave me a breakdown of how many there were in each county, the numbers were glaring. This is a list from Secretary of State Wes Allen of how many non-citizens were registered to vote in our counties. The state found 3,251 people. 742 of them were from North Alabama.
We got the information. We cross-checked it against our centralized data file here in the state of Alabama and found those 3,200 individuals.
The information he's talking about are people with alien registration numbers. Those are issued to immigrants who intend to live in this country permanently and have already applied for a green card. However, you're not eligible to vote with just an alien identification number. When I asked Allen how 3,000 plus were able to register in the first place, he couldn't give me the answer.
But it's our belief that only American citizens should be allowed to vote. Non-citizens, whether they're legal or illegal immigrants, cannot register to vote. It's a federal offense.
To vote here.
Amen to that. Now, this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable for Democrats because numbers start entering the chat. You know, over 3,000 non-citizens flagged on voter rolls, and immediately the response is in, how did this happen? How do we fix safeguards? No. It becomes lawsuits, narrative pivoting, process attacks, and this is the pattern people are noticing. When border enforcement tightens, when voter verification increases, when eligibility checks happen, the reaction isn't curiosity, it's resistance. Because, if election integrity measures are framed as oppression, then scrutiny itself becomes politically toxic, right? And that's exactly how accountability debates get shut down before they even start. Now, I want you to watch how quickly this narrative shifts when the opposition decides to go ahead and take the mic.
It is so... I don't really know where we are in this country. Why are we even having this conversation? The United States is falling apart right now, partially because he's going out and randomly allowing for the killings of people in the middle of the street. But the other part of it is that we have a 34-count convicted felon, and there are people that are still shielding him from any type of accountability as it relates to a child sex trafficking ring. It is time to take the blinders off. I don't understand why we are pretending like any of this is normal. And I think that is the level of frustration that so many people are bringing, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, specifically to the Epstein file situation. Because right now we know that they were willing to try to throw the Clintons in prison for not showing up, yet they won't even allow us to bring other people into committee who we know are mentioned in these files and mentioned so much more. When we went through the hearing as relates to the Clintons, I said, listen, we know that Donald Trump's name is mentioned more. Bring him in too. I'm not saying that this should be partisan. This should be whoever. I want to be clear about that. For the Democrats, this isn't partisanship. This is about right versus wrong. What do you think? Can I ask?
Yeah, right versus wrong. Here's the pivot strategy. When voter ID momentum rises, when polling numbers lean against the messaging, the conversation jump tracks entirely. It does. Now we're talking Epstein, felony counts, national collapse, not election safeguards, not citizenship verification. It's narrative redirection. And whether viewers agree with it or not, this illustrates a tactic people see constantly. Change battlefield, change emotional temperature, change the topic gravity, basically, because fighting on, the terrain of ID verification is much tougher to sell when public support numbers are this high. So instead, move the spotlight. But here's the part that disrupts that entire strategy.
There's a new Pew Research poll that 95% of Republicans, but also 71% of Democrats like this idea. So why do you not?
It's Jim Crow 2.0. And I called it Jim Crow 2.0, and the right wing went nuts all over the internet. That's because they know it's true. What they're trying to do here is the same thing that was done in the South for decades to prevent people of color from voting.
Really have to stop allowing these politicians to play in your face. That Jim Crow 2.0 does not move me, and it shouldn't move any black person. Let's talk about the SAVE Act and how it's currently being held hostage in the Senate by a filibuster. The SAVE Act simply wants to require proof of citizenship at voter registration, not on election day, not at the voting booth, but at registration. Voting is one of the most essential ways U.S. citizens stays connected to the government. So when you have a government that refuses to take proof of citizenship seriously, that creates massive disengagement, massive apathy, massive distrust, as you can see amongst Republicans and Democrats. Citizenship is already a federal requirement to vote. So you have to ask yourself, why are politicians like Chuck Schumer and other Democrat leaders fighting so hard to make sure that that verification is actually true? Because right now there's no type of verification. All you do is go register to vote. There is a box that says, are you a U.S. citizen? You check it, and they use some type of honor system. You either check it and you're telling the truth, or you check it and you're not telling the truth. You don't have to submit birth certificates. You don't have to submit a passport or anything. It's just attestation. There's no integrity in that, especially for something that is so important to civic engagement. Right now, you have Democrats in the Senate who refuse to give their votes to the SAVE Act because of disenfranchisement. They believe it's going to disenfranchise lower income Americans and the elderly. And I have to be honest with you, I think that is BS. Low income Americans and the elderly routinely access government assistance, Social Security, SNAP, WIC, Medicaid, Medicare, all for which need some type of identification. You mean to tell me that these same Democrats who shut down the government for over 40 days over healthcare subsidies and healthcare in general, where the American people would need identification to access that healthcare, now they don't have identification to register to vote? That doesn't add up to me. And so I'm not going to subscribe to something that is pushed by politicians like Chuck Schumer, that all of a sudden black people are too incompetent, too poor, too oppressed to access certain things like identification, birth certificates, passports, and things like that. No. It's not about racial disenfranchisement. It's not about voter ID. It's not about Jim Crow. This is about U.S. citizenship. Do not play in our face.
No, this is the clip Democrats struggle to counter because it doesn't come from pundits. It doesn't come from party messaging. It comes from someone the narrative assumes alignment from. You know, when my fellow black voters push back on the Jim Crow 2.0 label, it breaks the emotional leverage behind the argument. That leverage depends on victim framing, access assumptions, systemic helplessness narratives. But, you know, we the people say, I've always had my god dang on ID, bro. What you talking about? My community has ID. You know, this isn't suppression. That dismantles the moral high ground Democrats try to occupy on this issue. And that's when this debate is escalating nationally. Or why, rather. Because coalition predictability is fading. Voting blocks aren't moving in lockstep anymore. And messaging built on that expectation is starting to show cracks. So here's, you know, how it all ties together. We showed the logic contradiction argument. We exposed it in real interaction, grounded enforcement in real world impact, reframed ICE purpose, brought polling data into play, showed voter roll vulnerabilities, demonstrated narrative pivot tactics, and delivered grassroots pushback. This isn't random viral content. You know, this is a snapshot of a national shift happening in real time. Narratives are colliding. Coalitions are fracturing. Messaging is losing uniform control. And the reason Democrats are spiraling on voter ID specifically is because it sits at the intersection of, immigration, election, legitimacy, identity politics, institutional trust. Lose ground on that issue and the ripple effects hit everywhere else. That's why this conversation isn't cooling down anytime soon, y'all. So, is voter ID common sense? If you think so, and you made it to the end of the video, I want you to put common sense in the comment section. Y'all be safe. Go check out somebody today. You can quite literally be saving their life. But to go get me some rest, something to eat. Hungry.